Okay, picking up some more points from my previous video. I think I'm just going to have to speak to Platonic subjectivity, which is a short form of saying his metaphysics, which these days we all kind of appreciate that first of all, an experience can be a divided mind. Do I do this or do I do that? And typically thought may not result in action. Not unusual there, we all experience that. But taking the components, we have a mind, we have a heart, and then we have a body itself. Now this is tripart. Typically you can almost refer to it as dualism, because the issue is does the heart go with the mind, or does the mind go with the heart? Or does the heart or the desire go with the body? And then of course there is the religious version of this, that the flesh is weak. So there the heart goes with the body. The heart wants what it wants, the body is its means. So where does that leave the mind? Well, the mind in these models, they're at the top of they're physically up high in the mind, or the brain rather, but they're high in the values scheme of things. And we know the straight up dualism of it is in fact with Descartes, mind-body dualism. One moment, I'll continue to speak to Cartesian dualism and how that dualism today can play out. The mind-body is a metaphysic, is an idea, an ideology if you like, and it is a model of man. And we'll say model of man, we won't include woman, because time has passed since the issue of how we use language, that is how we behave, beyond the patriarchy, if you like. So time is such that we're beyond patriarchy, but from these philosophical and intellectual products, we have what's called models of man, or models of mankind. So I will refer to mankind, and that way I will not make assumptions, whether by default because I'm speaking of these people, about women. So that's a whole other thing, feminism and philosophy. So we've got René Descartes' development of a metaphysic that he's going to be rational about, because he can't engage in doubt and also wipe out his doubting. So for him, there is a subject that is doubting, and for that he assigns the mind, because he can picture a time where his body doesn't exist, or it's not his body that is doubting. Something like 120 years later, we've got Kant developing his form of subjectivity. And that is more, insofar as it's dualist, it is more along the lines of subject-object. But there is a difficulty, there's a number of elements to Kant's subjectivity that we can't easily get into, so we'll set that aside, but we will call Kant a dualist along the lines of Descartes. He certainly utilised the cogito, the I, as has many from Plato through to Freud, through to Nietzsche. Many have used it. Can we do subjectivity without the, what's it called? There's another term for it, the I. That is the letter I, the subject. Can't think of it right now. Is it possible? It would suggest that the mind is not part of the practice or metaphysics, if that's what you're doing with your concept of subjectivity. So we'll come back to that one as well. Just as the subject's divided, for Kant, it's the objects that's divided also. So the world of appearances is the world mediated by the subject. So my mind mediates the furniture, converts that input into information that I can use language to identify and refer. That's all very good. Remember, beyond this is a critique of language. But the subject itself belongs to a world that's divided. I think that's probably fairly key in Kant, that it's not just that you can linguistically identify an object and a subject, and the whole of that approach to language comes under scrutiny later. So even though I will use it, we know later, along with other elements in the subject for other philosophers, most notably the I, which I've mentioned, and of course Freud is the big ego guy. So we'll get back to that. The point in Kant is that breakup of the person, the subject, the human, internally, is also significantly an external breakup, that there are subjects and objects, but the objects aren't necessarily external, and the subject is not necessarily in the external world, because the external world becomes the noumenal world in Kant. So the actual world, or the outside, the objective reality that everyone draws on, but does so subjectively. So that's why it's significant in Kant. And of course myself, engaged in subjectivism, subjectivity, all of this is problematic because I'm not using a strong conception of objectivity, and in fact I'm trying to balance those concepts, even though there's linguistic problems with that approach. Although, don't we have a limited choice when it comes to approaching our world? We're handed a language, and that's another good example of subjectivity, that a subjectivity is not only historical, that is, that we come into the world and receive its history, however that is received, but also that we receive its language, the language of our family, our culture, that is going to make us make up our experience. So language mediates experience, some have said, and you'd have to agree to a significant amount. And then some fairly comprehensive analysis of this occurs with his name now escapes me, but his approach is American pragmatist Rorty. Right, Richard Rorty, American pragmatist, explains subjectivity as embodied vocabulary, so that the total of your experience, now this is well aware of what Kant's saying, that language, or that the world's mediated, that we said language mediates, is sort of an add-on. It's not something you'll see specifically in Kant, but it's pretty much there. He's leading you to have to make that assumption, because while he speaks of categories and types of concepts and the application of concepts, so that's a kind of logic coming into his system, and he was Aristotelian in this sense. He is presenting that mediated world as a philosopher of a subject who's mediating, who's the mediator of that world. So a world that's mediated by a subject that's a mediator. That's Kantian. So there's, that's just a few conceptions of subjectivity, and you hang a name on them: Kantian subjectivity, Freudian subjectivity, because these rational practices are defined, firstly by the work that they've done, but also because they fit in the ongoing history of rational practice. So, from there, I think we'll jump Nietzsche and just go straight to Freud, because Freud is, again, that high point in the mind, the ego, is actually one step below a superego. The relationship is complex, but I'm interested in that because the superego is where all the rule-based stuff is going on. So the inculcation of the child by the parent to a particular view is the building of the superego as a set of rules so that child may survive in society. From there we can speak of normativity as a phenomenon, and such that rule, existence of rules, how people approach value and apply value, and again move from thought to action, that is a feature of Freud's subjectivity, and generally speaking you'll find it from Plato. So again, mind in Plato as opposed to body, or mind, heart, mind, or soul. The words that they used are not these words, of course, but you can see that there's a movement between either two things, or you count that movement as a third thing. So you can have a tripartite, but they can seem dualist. And you get a starker view or representation in Descartes, very clear mind-body dualism. And then in Kant, it explodes again, it opens up again, becomes comprehensive, and he takes in the issue for the subject in a physical world, but having to mediate that physical world, and therefore, in doing so, can't be confident that the mediated world is the actual world. So it goes on and on like that. We'll skip the 19th century, although Freud by late 18th century was well underway in his training and developing his ideas. He's of interest to me because he has chopped and changed in his thinking about the subject, and you can in Freud find a variation in his subjectivity which is of interest also. So, and from there I think I was touching on following this path from metaphysics through knowledge or epistemological approaches to general knowledge, which is what I'm referring to here when I speak of subjectivity. It's quite general, but then philosophy is a generalising discipline. Then into, and carrying on an Enlightenment critique into the examination of language. So we have all this discourse about the activity of building a subjectivity, but what's critiquing that use of discourse or language as a vehicle, or language as a method to bring it back to our four items: intuition, subjectivity, rationality and methodology. I'll just close it off there. It's going to be a bit long otherwise.